Now that we've finished our first pair of tentacles, after a fashion, I'm going to show you how to attach the second pair of tentacles, that is, tentacles 3 and 4 to tentacles 1 and 2. For demonstration purposes, I'm using this weird, sort of stumpy little pair of tentacles I've created just for demonstration purposes. Yours, of course, will be much longer. For this stage, we're going to need the US size 6 needles that we've been using this whole time, and we're also going to need a tapestry needle. Just like before, our B side color is orange and our F side color is yellow. You'll start by laying your pair of tentacles out in front of you, tentacles off to either side, and this sort of center line where they meet laid out in front of you. You can see along that center line a bunch of pairs, or a bunch of stitches rather, that just sort of lie along that center line. And that's where we're going to be attaching our second pair of tentacles. I'm going to start coming up from the bottom edge with both of our strands of yarn on our tapestry needle. We're going to go under the 2 legs of that stitch. Just those 2 legs. We aren't going to be puncturing through to the F side of the piece. The stitch will be sort of slipping between the 2 layers of fabric. And when we decide how much yarn to pull through here, you're going to want to pull through a fair bit. You're going to need enough yarn to start a tentacle, and also enough to cast on 17 stitches. So just go for a fair bit. Then we're going to take our size 6 needle and kind of lay it along the center line, essentially, of this piece, so that we can figure out how to wrap this strand around it with the B color to the bottom. We're going to be going around it and then back down below the next pair of stitches. I'm just going to lift it up and show you. Right here. Just under those 2 legs of that one stitch. Not breaking through to the other side. Just slipping the needle through and pulling the yarn through after it. As you pull that yarn tight as you would want a cast-on stitch to be anyway, you want to make sure that you've got your B stitch on the bottom and the yellow stitch, your F stitch, above it. Then you sort of wrap your yarn around again, sort of finagling and tugging it as needed, to make sure you've got, again, your B strand at the bottom, F at the top, sort of around that needle. Kind of like that. And then we'll dive under the next pair of legs in the next center stitch, just like that. Pulling it tight, and as you can see, we've got the beginnings of our alternating BF pattern. If you look at the F side of the piece, you won't see any yarn poking through because we're just slipping under those first couple, that one layer, under the first layer of fabric. Again, we wrap that around and dive under the 2 legs comprising the next stitch along that center line. just like that. And we'll continue repeating this process until we have 17 stitches, until we have 16 stitches on the needle. Right there. Pulling it through and maintaining that alternating pattern. Sometimes the yarn might try to twist or get fussy with you, and you just sort of have to finagle it to make sure it continues to lie in that nice alternating pattern. Trying not to twist it as you wrap it. Keeping it nice and orderly. Continuing to dive just below that single layer of yarn. And then one last time. Here we go. Once you've gone under 8 stitches, you should have 16 stitches on your needle, right here, alternating in the usual pattern. And then, to make sure we end on the bee color, we just do a simple loop cast on to put one more on the end. So that's all we'll need from the tapestry needle for a while. We can sort of set that to one side and knot our long tails together so that we don't accidentally use them when we're meaning to use our live yarn. Having paused to take a drink of soda, we'll now pick this piece back up, and we're going to start by pulling our circular knitting needle through so that we can start casting on the other end. Now, as you cast on, you'll want to make sure that you're casting on such that the F side is facing you. You'll want the F strand to the front and the B strand to the back. You'll see what I mean as I work it. So, using our standard loop cast on stitch number 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 25, 26, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and that leaves us with 31 stitches on the needle. As you can see, they alternate throughout. We begin and end on the B color, and we've got the F color facing us, the B color away from us, and just like when we were initially casting on, our two colors sitting alongside each other with no twists or crossing strands between them. Alright, once you've finished casting on those stitches, you'll want to take some sort of stitch holder and put it through these stitches while they're still on the needle, or at least its cable. You can use a bit of scrap yarn. That'll be nice and flexible and won't get in your way when you start knitting the first row of Tentacle 3. However, it can make it a bit hard to pick up those stitches later when it comes time to start Tentacle 4. You can use a very rigid stitch holder for this, but that'll make it harder to start Tentacle 3. I find that the best sort of compromise option is the cable of another cabling needle, or perhaps even the same one if it's long enough for you to loop it through. So, at this point, you'll simply want to turn it around and start knitting your first row of Tentacle 3. You aren't going to be doing that extra sort of bonus F-side row in this one. You'll simply be starting with a B-side double knit row. The directions for the tentacle shawl indicate that you should basically knit 5 or so rows of Tentacle 3, and then pick up these stitches and start knitting Tentacle 4. The reason for that is the same as for doing the first few rows of Tentacle 1 and then starting Tentacle 2 before switching back to Tentacle 1. Basically, it gives you a chance to make sure everything is knitting up correctly and that the join between the two tentacles looks good, and it gives you a chance to rip it all out and start over again without too much wasted effort if it doesn't seem to be going well. So, because this is essentially a normal double knit row, I'm going to check out, do these first 5 rows, and then come back when it's time to pick up Tentacle 4. Alright, now I've finished doing those first 5 rows of Tentacle 5, and I've moved the live rows at the top of it onto a stitch holder. We've still got our stitch holder from before holding on to the bottom of Tentacle 3. Our next row to knit is going to sort of start from this side where we have the scrap yarn coming off. However, I'm going to want to slip the needle in the other direction so that we can work from the opposite end, because we have some stitches to rearrange before we can pick them up and start knitting them. So, if you're using some kind of stitch holder other than a cabling needle, or other than a knitting needle, like, you know, some scrap yarn or something, you'll want to put these stitches onto that circular size 6 needle first. But I'm already using one, so I'm just going to start from there. We're going to start by slipping the first stitch purlwise from our left needle onto the right. Then we're going to want to do a slightly odd maneuver where we take the F stitch and drop it from the left needle and pull it under this bit of yarn to pick it up. So we sort of finagle it through that gap. And we pick it up, also purlwise. Then we do it again, repeating the process until we've done it a total of 7 times. slipping the B stitch purlwise, dropping the F stitch, pulling it under that strand of B, and picking it up. Again. Slipping, purlwise, dropping, and picking back up again. Just like that. Basically keep on doing this until we get to the end of these loop method cast-on stitches and reach the stitches that are attached to tentacles 1 and 2. And much like when we were working with the stitches at the bottom of tentacle 1 to start tentacle 2, these ones will be a bit tight at first, and that'll make it a little tricky. But it should go smoothly once you get it started. Fighting with these tight stitches, trying not to split the yarn. It will be a little harrowing for a moment, but it'll be done soon. This one seems to have got turned around. So we'll shift it so that it's still got the right leg forward. Alright. And after much sweating and panting and heaving and strenuous action, we've got these shifted over in the correct way. So you can see, we've just got yellow to the front and orange to the back. We'll have a slight line right there on the F side that'll mostly be hidden when you're wearing it, and a nice smooth orange side. From this point on, you're ready to simply slip the rest of these stitches purlwise, just sliding them over from your left needle to your right. This is fairly basic, so I'm going to pause the video. Alright, well, slipping the stitches from the left needle to the right was fairly basic, and I accidentally punched my own camera and didn't want to do another take, so I've simply paused and skipped ahead to where we are now. As you can see, we've got all of our nice alternating stitches on this row, or on this needle, ready for us to knit and purl respectively, and as you can see, we've got nice, smooth, all B-side color on this side, and on the F side, it's all F-side color with no strands of the B color crossing over. We do have these funky little stitches right here. It'll create a slight ridge, but the ridge will be right where the shawl is worn against your back, or perhaps your arm, depending on whether you're wearing it at an angle. And it's fairly subtle, so it really shouldn't matter. Right here, we pick up the tails that we left for the purpose of beginning tentacle 4, and we begin double knitting it according to the directions just like the tentacles we've already knitted. Just like with Tentacle 3, we don't need to do an F side row. We skip straight to the pattern for the tentacle, doing a B row and then an F row and so on until we run out of tails. I'll do it with these while I pause the video and come back to you in a moment to show you how that looks. Alright, as you can see, I have finished knitting up the tails that were used to start Tentacle 4. Left just enough to do a Russian join or otherwise switch balls of yarn in a neat and tidy way when I'm ready to resume work on Tentacle 4. And as you can see, it looks good. Here on the B side, it's all B side yarn, no errant strands of F poking through. And on the F side, likewise, we've got all F all the time, no stray loops of B. If you want to see where Tentacle 3 joins the body on the underside, rather salacious, we have the underside of the tentacle, and it looks nice and smooth and neat and tight. And also where Tentacle F joins the body. You can see that it looks good, and at this point you're ready to shift your stitches from the stitch holder back onto the knitting needle and resume work on Tentacle 3. I think this is going to be the last tutorial in the series for the Tentacle Shawl. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me in accordance with the contact information provided with the pattern. Wish you the best in completing this pattern. I know I had a lot of fun designing it and knitting it up, and I hope you have fun playing with it too.